Have you ever thought of having an affair?
Hmm. Do you think that our marriage is susceptible to an affair? We're back, YouTube.
Okay, let's try that again. Do it again. I like that.
We're back, YouTube.
We're back with a book review. So, a publisher reached out to us a couple of weeks ago and they asked us to do a review of a book called Anatomy of an Affair by Dave Carter. And I'll be honest, at first we were both kind of like, ooh, that's kind of deep. I don't know. But the more we thought about it, we know how passionate we are about marriages, and we thought that this is something that happens a lot in our society today.
Yeah, I think it's a conversation that people don't talk about much. She told me she reached out and that they were going to send us a book, and I was really excited to read the book and all the content that we would come across. I was outside playing, and I totally forgot about it. I came home one day, I was playing outside with the boys, and I went to check the mail, and there was an envelope, of course. Who doesn't love getting packages? I'm like, a package. And I remembered, I think this is the book, so I'm like tearing into it like any excited person that loves getting packages, right? The package, paper falls on the ground, and it was the Anatomy of the Affair book, and I literally just came inside and was just flipping through the pages. And Brittany was doing something at the time, maybe cooking dinner, or probably in a little bit of chaos, as it normally is around here. But that's okay, we love it. And I just looked up at her as I was flipping through the books, and I said, man, do you think we can have an affair? Like, this is kind of...
Yeah,
I feel weird reading this.
Do you think this could happen to us? I'm like chasing 3 kids around, cooking dinner, and I'm like, whoa, what? Huh? We need to talk about this later. But really, it kind of pulled those heartstrings. Like, wow, that could happen to us. There's a really good possibility that it could. And so I think reading this book kind of gives us the mindset to be proactive in marriage so we don't have to be reactive later on. So if we're prepared for the ups and the downs as best we could be, it can help us with how we respond down the road. So I would say that this book is not just for people like in a healthy, happy marriage. I think this is a book for...
Definitely preventative to prevent and be aware of. So someone who's wanting to prevent, engage,
dating, engage. I mean, an affair is an affair.
Yeah.
Even if you have walked through that as a couple, there's a whole section committed to the restoration of marriage after an affair, which I think is really cool.
Mm-hmm. So definitely preventative, restoration, and really if you just want to read about it, for us it was like, you want to have that big mighty like, oh, we can never have an affair, but when you really break it down, and I think that's why I asked the question to Brittany was, do you think we could have an affair? Like, that's a tough question to ask in general, and I think the answer is always yes.
Because we're human.
Yeah, to be able to choke that down and be like, yes, and like for you to both agree, like, this can happen, like, how do we protect each other against this, and see some of these key points the book talks about, and we'll get to that here in just a second. But when I read this, I would when someone gets married or someone gets engaged, we have a book we recommend, and it's always been Sacred Marriage by Gary Thomas. Great author, incredible book. But I was telling Brittany, now that I don't want to just recommend the Sacred Marriage book. I want to recommend now this book with it. So like, hey, here's Sacred Marriage, but guess what? With the world and the society that we live in today, here's the anatomy of an affair and like stuff to talk about, to look for. Yes, you probably don't want to talk about this when you're engaged or you're first newlywed, but to be aware of these key points, it's very really good information in it. So let's get into it.
Can I tell them about the author?
Yeah.
The author's Dave Carter, and I think he did a phenomenal job. He didn't just write page after page. This book is just chocked full of, there's charts in it, there's real life emails, and we'll get into all of this, but I just want to give a huge shout out to Dr. Carter, because the way he writes, it's not boring at all. And we've all read those boring books.
Yeah. I think it says on the back, I'm being really real, I don't know 100%. He's been a pastor at a church. He's been a
yeah.
psychologist for a really long time. So like the dude has serious wisdom and has counseled many people and has seen a reoccurring event.
Yeah.
So like this isn't someone that's really young that just maybe is a passionate about not having an affair or has had an affair, but he's seen people
He's
come through the
walked through
doors
it
and
with
has
people.
walked through with numerous people.
So this book has a lot of raw emails from couples that are unedited, just saying like, hey, like this is what we're going through, and we get to see it firsthand through the book. So
So
we don't want to give away too
yeah.
much.
So diving in, we took 3 snippets from Anatomy of an Affair. You see what we did there? It's very clever. It talks about marital voids, and there's an emotional component, and there's an activity component. And from the activity component, it talks about that most couples, they stop having fun together. They don't spend money on their marriage anymore. They stop building memories between the two of them, maybe even their family. They're consumed with making it through the day, to month.
Oh my gosh, do you see those people? Everyone sees them on Facebook. I can't wait for Friday. I can't wait for Friday. It's like, what about today? What can you do today to make a memory?
Living in the moment. And hoping for something better next year. It's like, what's that next? It's like she just said, let's live for today and what God has given us today.
Yeah.
And that's just the activity component that it mentions. And I think that's a critical thing because we get so consumed. I mean, even we're guilty of, you get in rhythm. We're such type A. We have a schedule we follow. We go through every single day, once through the weeks, and when something slips in is totally different. It really throws a kink sometimes. But I think that's good. It's good to get off balance. It's good for me to say, hey, we're going to be spontaneous and we're going to have breakfast for dinner, which I don't really like doing.
He doesn't ever do that.
But like that's what keeps the family. That's what keeps your marriage. That's what a lot of those things really help. Change things. I think when you get in the mundane, like marriage gets boring, family gets boring, being a dad gets boring, being a wife gets boring.
If you let it, for sure. I think something to add with the activity component is dating. We went to that marriage conference when I was pregnant with Stella, and I loved something that he said. There's no excuse not for date nights. If you don't have the money or you don't have the babysitters, put the kids to bed early and be intentional and have a date night at home. And that's something we do on Tuesday nights.
We watch This Is Us.
This Is Us is our date night. But we put the kids to bed early, and the kids know come Tuesday, mom and dad are having date night. That's their special night. And I think that's good for them to see. But
Absolutely.
yeah, like if you can't go out and make a memory together, make a memory at home. Like just you can make memories anywhere. It's a perspective and a mindset.
I think she brings a good point up of having a date night at home. Like that's kind of silly. You're really kind of thinking outside of the box. But for me, when I think of like date night, I want to think of like a nice dinner, like all this stuff. But it doesn't have to be that, guys. Like we can do something so simple, like hey, we're gonna have a picnic, and I'm gonna make dinner for you in the living room floor. Like you thought of it. It's special. Like it's about taking the time to do those things. So you want to mention the next point?
Something that I love with the book I mentioned is all the charts. That was just, it kept me involved in the book. And so one of my favorites was the high risk factor. I'm just going to give a little glimpse of it. And it's a little checklist. It's a yes no checklist. And it goes through...
Yeah, hold it up there closer. Let's see it. Sorry,
It goes through different scenarios and situations to determine if you're a high risk factor mate, which we all are a risk factor. But it goes through things like, do you have a family history of infidelity? And that could go back to 2 generations. So if you have to check yes to that, then that immediately makes you more of a risk factor. But there's also things such as fantasizing about different people and life transitions, pregnancy, job changes,
lost.
So there's just so many of these that we didn't even think through.
I would have never thought that you can get a chart and say, hey, are you high risk or low risk for an affair?
Like such as the learning disability part. It says people with learning disabilities tend to be a higher risk factor because they constantly need that reassurance. And I never thought of that, but if the wife's or the husband's not the one reassuring, but someone at work is constantly patting them on the back and telling them how great they are, a little bit of those heartstrings start to get pulled. And it's innocent. Yeah,
and that's really what we noticed a lot. She mentioned this could be you stories that they talk about, and
I'll mention it in a minute.
She'll mention it in a second, but we just saw a huge trend of like so many of the affairs started off like with such innocence, or like they were just someone we were doing work with, or we were doing voluntary work, or it was stuff that we were assigned on a project. Like there was no like, ooh, I think she's attractive, or I think she's hot, I want to have an affair with her. It was never from that. But it's the song that makes me think. I forget who sings it. It's a slow fade. I think it's at Casting Crowns. It's a slow fade, and that's what it is. And then you get in it, and you're like, well, how did I get here?
Yeah. Well, and my OB is always tells me my biggest sex organ is in my head. And I think that goes for anyone. Like, it just starts within your head thinking, man, that person paid attention to me. And that leads to the heart, which eventually leads to actions. So just being really conscientious of that. But there's other charts in here that I really like. There's a respect chart.
Yes.
Because we know that men thrive off of respect and women thrive off of love. If you haven't read Love and Respect, it's a good one. But the respect quiz is great to go through and see, are you respecting or disrespecting your spouse, whether you know it or not. It could be the little things. There was one on how your parents influence your marriage and your upbringing, and all the way down to like who you saw taking the trash out. How does that affect what you think the roles in marriage should be? And then of course there's the marital satisfaction timeline, which is super intriguing because he brought the point up, like a time when he may have felt really high and satisfied in our marriage, I may have felt down here. So to really cross those and to examine.
And you literally see it on like
a
timeline.
Yeah.
And it's just a great discussion. Going through some of these real life, whether it's a high risk, whether it's a respect, because you might uncover things like, oh, I didn't know I wasn't respecting you, or I didn't know that we were both high risk factors for an affair. Like, okay, we probably should pay more attention to this, all just from answering like 15 questions, yes or no questions. So
yeah, what I love about this book is it brought so much onto our radar that wasn't even there, like it wasn't even a thought.
Right.
And I think again that helped us for the future to be able to be proactive in the now, so we don't have to be reactive in the later. Or if we do have to be reactive, we're a little more equipped for it.
Right. Yeah, absolutely, for sure. So the last little snippet here from the book is it mentioned, in order to have time for yourself, you have to steal it from your children. And that's kind of a crazy statement, but it's so true. At least for the stage and the season that we're in, is if we want time for ourselves, we have to be intentional. We have to have that date night. We have to put the kids down like earlier, hour and a half, 2 hours earlier than we normally do on the weekdays.
Side note, if you don't know us, you should watch the 10 things. But we have a 4-year-old, a 2.5-year-old, and a 6-month-old. So for those that have walked that season of life, you know that it's like non-stop, 24/7, needy. And I realize that it'll always be that way when you have kids. The needs change, but we're just in that stage. Like we're wiping 3 bottoms a day, and we're wiping 3 faces a day, and so
it's easy to forget each other.
Oh my gosh,
very. Yeah. So, but that's why we're thankful for books like this. That's why we're thankful for lots of things.
One thing I wanted to, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. I liked how I think it was in the book about how important it is that when you're together to be like there's a time to just veg out and be together, but there's also a time to just bring up the tough topics and not always stay safe. And I think of that verse, I think it's in Proverbs, that as iron sharpens iron, so one man sharpens another. And that's just something to remember. Like, this is a marriage union, but we're also accountability partners in Christ, and we are to be sharpening each other, not just in like our professional traits or our home traits, but in our walk with the Lord.
Yeah.
So these aren't easy conversations by any means. They're like gut-wrenching, but needed.
That leads into what they have to say next. We have notes here if y'all haven't found out yet that we're looking down at. So it says when couples have alone time, they will inherently choose to talk about the safe topics. If you're not careful, the cluster of safety will become the only things that the two of you will talk about, and your relationship will become boring. So like you said, at the end of wiping faces, wiping bottoms, cleaning up, coming home, she's been with the kids all day long. and I come home and I've been at work, you know, we really sometimes just want to sit down and stare at our phones or just veg out or watch something on Netflix or whatever that it is. And
that's okay sometimes.
yeah, sometimes that's totally okay. But when if it's a consistent pattern, I think that's where it becomes a problem. If you're not, if you haven't had a deep question, whether it's driving somewhere, whether something came up or you read something of like, hey, do you think we could have an affair? Those type of things. Like, I really encourage you to
Absolutely.
put your phone down, say, okay, we need to do better at having these intentional conversations, or we've been wrapped up in our family, or we've just been too busy. Because I think it's from these questions and from these charts, from these surveys, whatever you want to call them, like they will open up those doors and let you have those really intense conversations. And it's I think it's very fruitful. I think Scripture talks about, you know, if you're not producing fruit, it's going to be severed from the vine. So, like, you know, we want to encourage you to produce fruit. We want to produce fruit. And we want to recognize where the fruit's dying and where we need to trim it off and allow it to produce more fruit.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So that's just a short little wrap up. If you're interested in more information, we will put a link to this book in the comments below. Feel free to email us, snippetsofstewarts@gmail.com. You can hop over and find it on the blog, or you can just snippetsofstewarts@gmail.com.
Comment down below.
Or comment, because we'll follow up with everybody. But I could not recommend this book more. I mean,
whether you won't read it, you know someone who's read it, maybe you've been through it. I mean, whatever the case might be, it's been an incredible read. It's been
a blessing, I think.
I call it piggy tail. I've folded so many of the little pages down in there. I hope you can see. Yeah. So really, really good. Thank you so much for watching this.
And thank you, Dave and his publishers.
Shout out for sure.
For providing us with this book. This is a sponsored video. We were given this book for the review, but I hope you can tell this is a genuine review. Sure. This is 100% all our thoughts. So we love marriage. We want to cheer every marriage on, and we want to see people beat the odds. So
thank y'all.